Welcome to the Forest of Thought with me, Ingrid Rieser. What could art making and aesthetics mean to us in these difficult times? Can we even really justify going off to paint or just to spend time in nature when there's so much destruction going on in the world? Aesthetics is about opening up our senses to the world. But do we even want to stay sensitive when there's so much pain? How do we deal with that paradox? Today I'm speaking to educator and artist Jan van Boeckel.
For me, art is not so much a method as a way of being, a way of relating to the world. And I think one of its most powerful dimensions is to open up for the unexpected, the unknown, to what is not planned, to allow things to ferment, to emerge, and to try to loosen the idea that you are in control.
Jan's work brings together art, education, and ecology. He's been professor in art and sustainability at Hanze University in the Netherlands and is now a senior research associate there. He's also an avid painter and hosts what he calls wild painting courses throughout Europe. For the second summer in a row, Jan hosted one of these courses in the place where I spent most of my childhood, in the small village of Rauland, nestled at the edge of the Hardanger mountain plateau in southern Norway. We talked on the hill behind my mom's house, looking out on the lakes and mountains that I grew up with. So, Jan, so nice that we could make this happen, that we could get together to have this conversation. And as I was saying before we started recording, it feels very special for me to be doing this conversation here because we're in Rauland, which is a small mountain village in Norway, close to the Hardanger Plateau, which is where I spent most of my childhood, where I grew up. So probably the most important place for me, in my life, basically. So it feels very nice that we're here. And also looking out on the lake and this spot, this specific place also in Rauland, that has been very important to me. And when we were talking about this the other night, I found out that because I know you've had a long relationship with Scandinavia, coming here a lot, even though you're from the Netherlands, you've lived in Sweden a lot, you spent a lot of time in Norway, and that you came to Norway for the first time a long time ago, but that you, on that trip, also came here to Rauland, which I thought was pretty incredible.
Yeah, it is, yeah. It's like a twist or a special occasion in one's life. When I was a small kid in 1973, we as a family, we traveled, we took the boat to Christiansand, and then up we went towards the mountains, and it was all very much overwhelming for me to see these mountains. And I remember, for example, in the distance you see a mountain there with an inclination made by a glacier. My father was a geophysicist, and he pointed out that very same form that you see over there, how it's what its origin was, and I made a drawing of it. So to be at the same place in Rauland is also for me very special. And it's thanks to your sister Anja who suggested why not do a wild painting course here at Rauland's Academy, so the Academy of Rauland. And it's great to work here because everywhere you go, you find nice spots to be in the natural surroundings. And we have had very good weather so far. So
yeah, it's so hot that we're having to sit in the shade, which is not something that happens every day in the summer here, I can tell you. And so you work a lot with helping people to connect and learn about the natural world especially through art and doing arts education. But you were saying now that you were already doing drawing and painting and so stuff like that as a kid. So could you say something about this, how this has developed for you, and I don't know, your relationship with connecting to the natural world through art, and for you personally, that journey? Yeah,
it's been always a bit, you might say, on the side, is working with art, artistic practices. On the side, I first studied several years ago anthropology, social anthropology in the University of Amsterdam, together with Cecile, my partner, and we did our field work New Mexico and Arizona with the Hopi and Navajo people. And I was at that time very much involved in, you might say, human rights work for indigenous peoples. And learning more from indigenous peoples, being with them, also indigenous leaders, elders. I started to immerse myself more in environmental philosophy, eco-philosophy. And you cannot escape them learning about the work of Arnie Ness, who actually had a cabin not so very far from here on the Hardangervidda plateau on the mountain Hallingskarvet. So for me, it was interesting to explore this combination of art in the context of environmental philosophy, environmental education. It's my passion, maybe because it combines my own inclination to draw and to paint, to see how the world is if you approach it with a pencil or with a brush. And to combine that with other states of being in an active relation, in a reciprocal relation with the natural environment. So it spun me in a way. We made a film as a filmmaking team in 1995 with Arnie Ness at his cabin. The film's called The Call of the Mountain. And it's sort of introduction in deep ecology and the deep ecology movement. And since then, when I shifted my intention from working with indigenous peoples to this combination of what you might say of ecology, environment, art, and education or pedagogy. And for me, it was a big thing that I was doing an art course actually on the island of Öland. And then in the library of this center called Capella Gordon, there was a booklet on the Nordic organization of art education. In it, I found an article where Meri Helge Mantere, Finnish art therapist, introduced, for me at least for the first time, this idea of arts-based environmental education. And it was for me, wow. It even starts with a quotation by Arnie Ness. But it brings these three dimensions in this triangle, art, ecology, and education, together in a very meaningful way. And the key of it is that you start an educational process, a way of finding connections to the natural world, so more than the human world, through artistic practice, through artistic engaging. So this is exceptional because usually what happens is that, for example, in more conventional environmental education, that art is like a play to get people excited, enthusiastic, and then we move to the serious stuff. Then the science comes in, the explanations. And then the teacher is very much, or the guide is transferring his or her knowledge, explaining what the species are about. And if you go to the art academies, at least 10 years ago or 20 years ago, it was almost like a no-go to bring in the environment or the ecology. The environment was like seen as being romantic art in the environment, and ecology.
Oh, God forbid.
Yeah, instrumentalization of art. So it was not art for art's sake, l'art pour l'art. So for me, it was quite new that you actually could bring these in a meaningful relation together, and it has been my passion ever since.
Hmm. Yeah, and so it's the difference between using, or as you were saying, I feel like sometimes these days art is brought in as a way to communicate in an instrumental way, the issues of climate change or ecology or whatever. But that's what you're saying, is that is art as a method in itself of engaging learning.
Yeah, or rather maybe not. So I try to move away from words like method or toolkit, because so much of our education, but the way we go about approaching the world, doing projects, for example, is about what you anticipate the result will be, what is the goal, what is the aim, what are the objectives, how do you know that you are going to reach these objectives in a meaningful way, and then once the participants have gone through the process, that you can check, have you approached goal 1, 2, or 3, and as if you can already contain this in the beginning. And I think for me, art is not so much a method as a way of being, a way of relating to the world. And I think one of its most powerful dimensions is to open up for the unexpected, the unknown, what is not planned, to allow things to ferment, to emerge, and to try to loosen the idea that you are in control.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating because it feels like artists are sometimes among the best in that they know how to be in this uncertainty because it's maybe required. for really great art, and so maybe I know that you've talked about before that maybe this being with the uncertainty is something that we need in these times, being able to hold that, to be able to hold uncertainty and then also paradox in a way. I don't know if you want to say something more about that.
Yeah, no, you're quite right that is for me a key aspect, and in that I would also like to try to move away from the notion of the artist. I mean, some people are maybe more intensively working with art or have what we have usually call talent. But if we see art as a way of being, a way of relating to the world, then this is this Joseph Beuys notion of...
You have a spider on your...
Oh, thank you. Spider's just removed.
Yeah.
The Joseph Beuys said every human being is an artist. He didn't mean every human being is Van Gogh, as we say, or Rembrandt, but he meant that this artistic capacity of relating to the world is basically in everyone. And I think working with art, I mean, art can be in many different ways. It can be very conceptual, it's very theoretical. But art, to me, one of its qualities it can bring into the world is that it is giving you it helps you to engage with uncertainty, and also with the complexity of the times we're living in today. And I think Douglas Hine once wrote about several aspects of what art can bring into the world. And one of the things he mentioned that art can enable us to look at things that if we would look at them directly, something inside of us would turn to stone. Yeah. So that what he is suggesting here, I think that the indirect way of looking at things through art or through an artist-driven approach allows you to approach things not head-on, but maybe with a detour or in another way. In doing this, first of all, you have more time. You maybe relax a bit, that you don't have to jump to conclusions. It's not either A or B. And you can live maybe a bit longer, as you mentioned it, with paradoxes or contradictions. So much of our lives in Western societies that we need to change. We have to make up our minds. We have to choose a party and stand for what you think that you. It's seen as a weakness that you are still in doubt or that you change your position. And I think art can help us to embrace this uncertainty, this complexity, and to hold out in that. And that maybe what is relevant here is that often people have this idea that artists are good to think outside of the box. You hear that often. Mm-hmm. And I would say maybe artists are just as good as thinking inside the box, meaning that if they are confronted with limitations, with a frame, maybe when you're painting, when you only are using 3 colors instead of all the colors there are there, that you have to make do with what is limiting for you. And there can then be a flip moment that actually what is limiting you is something that offers you new potentialities. There's a philosophical concept for this. It's called enabling constraints. That the constraints or the limits are actually enabling something in you. So if we meet uncertainty, complexity, not having the full picture, that we can still try to move forward with all the mistakes or the flaws or collapses that might happen. But you can also try to embrace these, to see these as learning steps, learning moments in your journey. And we was just talking about it. I'm teaching now this course on in wild painting, and I mentioned that Paul Cézanne said, when you're painting, at any stage of making the painting is already finished. So if that's the case, I like that idea that you can embrace whatever state the painting is in. So the obsession that you need to work towards its finishing point, you can put it aside. And maybe if I go on in relationship to the times that we're living in today, I think the uncertainty or the poly crisis, the meta crisis, as it is unfolding, is more and more manifest to many people. So I think it's urgent that we as a society find ways to navigate this. How do we hold out? How do we keep our ground in things that are very much in turmoil, in radical flux all the time? And so I think it may be part of a survival mechanism or a survival strategy to find ways that we can still find a balance or a sense of meaning in things that are so much in change, and also change for the worse. That much of the news that we get is discouraging, that things are even worse than we thought. Some things are, of course, getting better, like the use of solar energy, that it is still growing. But on the whole, like, for example, the biodiversity crisis, that species are dying out at alarming rates. These are losses that we cannot make up. Once a species is gone, it's gone. So to be able to hold your ground or to keep your balance in this, I have come to think that aesthetics is more and more important. And this is actually a notion of a depth psychologist. His name is James Hillman. And he has this idea that maybe the ecological crisis, the crisis we have in the world today, he said this in the 80s, is really an aesthetic crisis. And this may sound a bit puzzling, but one might think, well, aesthetics is about as far away from the crisis that we can think of. But what he meant with it is that the aesthetics is this idea of the root of the word in the etymology from the Greek language is approaching the world through the senses, the direct contact, the participation in the world, and also the relation to breathing, for this moment of this being astonished or overwhelmed, the sense of awe that you have. And I think this the whole domain of aesthetics has been diminished. It's so little relevant. James Hillman gives this interesting example of that before we eat food, we usually look at the package, what is in it, to be sure that it is safe food. So we, in some profound sense, we don't trust our senses of how does the food actually taste, but we first want to know what's in it, probably for good reasons. But that the senses as our first gateway to the world. And I think usually we think of aesthetics as that domain of art criticism that relates to what is beautiful, what is ugly, or what is sublime. These is like from Immanuel Kant, the philosopher. This is the usual way of thinking of aesthetics, and
right, the way things look, just as as an observer.
Yeah, but exactly, that you stand outside of it.
Yeah, outside
and it is about the beauty of it. And James Hillman and others call us back on the roots of the aesthetic experience. But also, I think its relationship to indeed maybe through the senses to the beauty of things, of being impacted, that some, like sitting here, for example, at this moment of the day, is a joyful experience. To actually acknowledge this, to not take it for granted. And why I think that this is relevant is that we seldom allow these experiences because usually we think of it as a lack of a loss of time. So people overwork themselves, so they get into a burnout, too much stress, and then they might go to a physician or a therapist, a coach, and he or she might say, well, you should actually go hiking more, you should be more out in nature, or you should try to find some silence, do some mindfulness training. And all these qualities are already around us, but we are not accessing them or not paying attention to them sufficiently, I would say. And there I think the domain of aesthetics or the domain of art can help to actually reconnect with the beauty of the world.
Yeah, and it's I know that you said also about this aesthetic, the word anesthesia, the anesthetic being the opposite, so being numb, being numbed. Of course, it's usually you get anesthesia when you have good need of it to have an operation or something similar, but that this is actually an affliction maybe that we are experiencing in our society, that we have this numbness, which has to do with the lack of aesthetic sensibility, or where we think of this, where we think of beauty, or we think of the aesthetic, which doesn't have to be beautiful, but which has to do with experiencing the world through our senses, as you said, we talk about that as something extra rather than something essential. So I think that I maybe previously, for example, would think that, I would try to use as little resources as possible. So, for example, never buying flowers, maybe, or feeling bad for picking flowers or something, because of this, because of or using resources to work with the aesthetic experience, because of being in a more rationalistic, resource-focused mindset. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Because for me now it feels like, well, the aesthetic experience, the way of experiencing a place or the world is so crucial, and that the world would be an impoverished place if we're only focused on, if we only focus on how to get the most amount of calories and not on how the food looks and how it tastes. The world would be very impoverished by that.
Yeah, for me it's very relevant. Maybe I was also alluding to that a little bit earlier, that in a way I think this engaging with aesthetics, or maybe engaging with wild painting or things like that, is in itself a political act. That may sound rather odd or presumptuous, but I think what I see around me, that activists, people, for example, working for very good reasons with Extinction Rebellion or other groups, still try to fight where a lot of people give up. That if they don't have a source where they can replenish themselves. Yeah, recharge maybe less adequate word, but find a source again that keeps them going. And sooner or later they hit the wall, and maybe then the worst might happen, that they become cynical. I think cynicism can be a very destructive force, I believe. So that if you find ways, so that people access this potential of relating to beauty. In today's world, beauty is almost like a forbidden word as aesthetics, also in art academies. But if you find ways that they can relate to it, and again relate to it, maybe reconnection, then they have some driving force that may keep them going, which is ignored. Yeah, this is also related to what you mentioned about numbing, that the anesthetics, that you, if you are to have an operation, your sensory system has to be shut off, numbed by injection or anesthetist doing this. But maybe the state of being numbed to the world is indeed so present that and I think this has to do, this seeps in very early in childhood, actually. That I often give the example that if you ask children to make a drawing or a painting of a tree, that until the age of 6, 7, you get quite interesting trees, individual expressions, maybe not all necessarily looking like a tree, but it is the child's own choice. But after the age of 7, the tree starts to be like two lines in vertical position, and then you fill it up with brown, that is the trunk of the tree, and a green cloud on top of it, you fill it with green, that is the leaves. And this is the kind of tree that we make with the autopilot mode. We think when we have to draw a tree, this is how the tree should like, because then the teacher or the parent is going to approve it. So to me, this is a kind of numbing to the world, because trees almost never look like this. But it is difficult to come from this numbing to actually being with the tree as it is. So you mentioned, interestingly, at the very beginning of our talk, that how can art help people? I think also there's a problem in the word help, because the force, for example, in art education, as I see, is creating the conditions. Maybe it is a form of helping, but that people are themselves able to open up a window inside of themselves that they have held closed. And but the actual work, the opening of the window, is done by the person themselves, by the person, him or herself. And when this happens, there can be tears. It is a joyful or a terrifying experience. And it is breaking through a layer, through some kind of wrapping paper, that we often find ourselves in. Maybe just to give an example of how this can happen is that, like at a place we're now looking at lakes in front of us and hills, start of mountains in the backdrop. It's all green and the reflection of the sky in the water. If you ask people to paint this, they will start often making the stereotypical, the way you make a fir tree, like all these conical forms on top of each other. The whole painting would be green, and there would be a blue sky with white clouds, as we are seeing. But I then might ask, try to paint this place, where we find ourselves, in as wrong as possible, so that you use colors that are completely opposite of what you see. Yeah. And if you start like this, it's odd. It's, in some profound way, your painting is already a failure, a mistake. So you can leave that aside because you already failed. That's out of.
You don't have to worry about that.
Don't worry about that. Everybody that participates makes a wrong painting. I tell this whole story because it's a way of dealing with this, trying to break through this numbness. That you need to be put on the wrong foot in a way to discover this yourself. And it's often so profound because people actually experience that it is something they access themselves. It's not like knowledge transfer. It's only through the experience that you really can embrace it.
Yeah, because you're as a facilitator, you are creating you're creating the context, but it's something that the participants are doing themselves, and that's maybe the key.
Yeah.
Difference. Yeah. And
maybe the other part of your question is like with the food, for example, that we have today, and that your own development, that maybe before being more sort of focused on doing it maybe
more resource efficient way.
Yeah, for example. And then maybe now with the other dimensions coming in, often people can see this as an either-or. Either you're fully environmentally conscious and you're very aware of your ecological footprint, or you're careless, you're completely obnoxious or ignorant about the crisis of the world, and you just pretend that the whole world is for your own. And to me, there is a possibility, I try to believe that there is a possibility of embracing the two positions. And embracing the two positions, it's like this, how do you relate to it?
Sorry, excuse me.
That you don't necessarily have to choose a side. Like when we talked about artists, that they don't immediately have to jump either you're with us or against us. You have to, it's A or B, and never it is A and B, or it is also maybe C or D or F. Mm-hmm. So that the ability to live with, to hold these contradictions is, I think, very valuable. There's this writer, his name is Scott Fitzgerald, he wrote the book The Great Gatsby, that he once said in the 1920s that the characteristic of us, what he called a superior intelligence, is the ability to embrace two completely contrary ideas and still retain the ability to function. And then he added, for example, one might say that the situation is hopeless, but one is still determined to make it otherwise. So the either-or universe is hopeless, so you might as well stop doing anything. Or you can still do something, but then it is not really hopeless. But the interesting thing is that he said this is a characteristic of a superior intelligence. And you might say it's a characteristic of an artistic way of relating. So related to living a sustainable, perfect, tuned life, but also in the world that we are today. It may mean that you, for some people, that you isolate yourself from social spheres that, for example, your contemporaries, your peer group finds itself in, that you become secluded, or other people judge you as being a monk and all the time criticizing or bringing up the ecological dimension, and that you are the one who is disturbing the party. So
you're saying that people will criticize you for ruining the party because you bring up these ecological questions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if you want to be totally consistent, and nobody can ever be totally consistent, or we always have an ecological footprint in one way or the other. Mm-hmm. But it is limiting oneself in a way that you become an outsider. People look down upon you. in the Dutch we have this expression of geitenwolle sokken, those who wear the goat socks, wool of goats, and that's immediately like a label to put you down.
Okay.
But you can also embrace it, so that you say, well, so what? Maybe part of me is this guy wearing goat wool socks, but that you allow the contradiction to be there. And I've came upon this term for this mindful schizophrenia. And the idea is that I don't take down schizophrenia in its clinical sense of the serious disturbance of illness of people, but I take it in its root meaning of living with a split mind. And the split mind is that yes, you are in a contradiction. You have an ecological footprint, and why do you allow yourself, for example, to not spend all your time on fighting the ecological crisis, and you go out painting in the mountains? So that's maybe a big contradiction. But the idea is that there's this idea that you can embrace this contradiction in the sense that, okay, this is part of being alive today. If I wouldn't be painting, I might hit my head against the wall and become totally cynical. And what would be the help for the world if I do that? And the mindfulness is that you try to be in the here and now as much as possible, and to put assumptions, qualifications aside, to just tune in, to be in the state of attention with a lack of intention to the world. So you mindfully look at what is this condition. And it's not like you're ignoring, not at all, that there is an ecological crisis. You're not sweeping your own ecological footprint under the carpet. But on the other hand, you also don't let that whole domain of living the strict Puritan life make your whole universe. And this juggling, that you are in contradiction, I think it can be not a negative part, but it can actually be a quality and something that we may need fast.
Yeah, and it's and there's something about that thing of, well, should I be spending my time trying to work to minimize my ecological footprint, or can I also be spending some of my time painting in the mountains? I also feel like if we focus on this, how do we find another way of being in the world, or trying to connect to that as much as possible, like what you were talking about, that art might provide us with. There's many pathways to that, but that it also has to do with this thing that you were saying about aesthetics. How do we open ourselves to the world when so much in the world maybe makes us want to shut down? Mm-hmm. And I feel like that may be just as important as minimizing our resource use, but that we can. It's now I'm putting them against each other again. Mm-hmm. but like you said, we have to live with the fact that we are that everything, since everything is connected, we are a part of everything. So we're complicit in everything, in the good, for the good and the bad,
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's wonderful, and it's what's painful, is that we can't unlink ourselves from everything that is happening in the world. We can try to be in relation as best as we can, but we can never remove ourselves completely from that destruction. But we can try to, if we think about, you talk about Gregory Bateson and his idea of the pattern that connects. And I'm thinking that I'm also a pattern. So how can I embody that pattern that is me, or how can I make that pattern be that pattern in the most beautiful way that is interacting with the greater pattern in a way that gives rise to good things. Mm-hmm. That will not always give rise to good things, but that can be my sort of guiding star in a way.
Yeah, good question. And it's interesting that you bring up Gregory Bateson, because I'm very inspired by his work. But this move of looking what is the pattern that actually connects, and he talks about this, the pattern that connects the crab to the lobster, and the orchid to the primrose, and all of the four to me, and me to you. So it's forging, bringing about, of looking at these relationships, this pattern of relationships, web of relationships, rather than separating them and isolating them like we have been doing so long, from Linnaeus, from the botanist, to divide up in families and kingdoms, the natural world, to see the divisions. And also the way we treat problems is to break them down in the smallest components, to solve every component and then try to reassemble them again as if that whole will solve the problem. So we start to learn by now that with wicked problems, we will never solve them this way, because to look at them in isolation is only making things worse. If you move in the other direction of seeing these relationships, looking for the pattern that connects, your world is, in a, I think, very literal sense, expanding. And there's, I think, an interesting different way of looking at this. You have this notion of the philosopher from Norway who coined the term deep ecology, Arne Næss, who talks about wide identification. And wide identification is that you see part of yourself in the other, in that form in nature, that species, that plants, or even that landscape, that ecosystem, that you identify with something that is not you, but that is also part of the living world. So very close to this idea of seeking the pattern that connects, of Gregory Bateson. And he tells of this moving experience that he was once in his hut, in his cabin on the Hallingskarvet. The name of his cabin is Tvergerstein. He spent there many years writing his books, often alone. And he was also an amateur chemist. And at one time he looking at the drop of a liquid through his microscope, and there was a lemming, this small rodent jumping around on the table. And it's an impossible story, because a flea jumped from the skin of this lemming into the drop of liquid that he was studying. And he said he could do nothing to rescue the flea. He intended to. There were tensions on the surface of this liquid that pulled it down. So the only thing he said he could do is look through his microscope and bear witness to the actual dying of this flea. And he said it had 6 limbs, and all these limbs were contracting of pain, very much like a human being would be in severe pain. And so he said he could not help but identify with this other creature. He often gives this example of that, even something minute as a flea, that you can see part of yourself in it. But then another environmental philosopher, David Abram, he says that if you do this too strongly, this identification of the world, that you see yourself everywhere, in the tree, in the landscape, then you take away what he calls the eros. And the eros is that force of difference, that you are attracted, but also in a very profound sense not the same. So that there is this creative tension of polarities. So I think this is interesting also, that maybe by completely surrendering to the pattern that connects, jumping into this web of relationships without looking at the eye, what it also is unique to be a human, is also maybe sometimes a bridge too far. That I think that there's certain qualities of being a human being that are so special and profound. There's something about our presence as humans in the world that is indeed unique, that is incomparable, not to foreground it or not to put it on a pedestal, but to also appreciate this eros between us and the rest of the world.
Yeah, and that we have something to contribute rather than, I mean, we can of course focus on all of our destructive tendencies as a species, but that we can also say, well, you know, the universe is expressing itself in a certain way through the species that is the human species. And so how, but the question is how we do that. But in relation to this becoming part of the, you know, completely sort of identifying with the world around us, and it's also coming back to this thing of the aesthetic and the anesthetic, is that I know a lot of people, and I can relate to it myself too, who are so full of empathy, or so sensitive to the destruction of the world, that it's just too much to take it in. Well, actually, it's probably too much for most of us, given the state of the world and also how accessible news is at the moment. People get into these, we often become also addicted to this. Maybe it's the opposite of dopamine addiction, but we become addicted to the adrenaline or something, the stress of seeing this upsetting news all the time. So that's another question. What do you think about that? I mean, the way that I've thought about it is that we do need to protect ourselves and not be relating to all of the destruction of the world constantly. But we can do it mindfully, and also make sure to open ourselves up when it is safe, so to speak. Open us up in relation in conversations with friends or in places in nature, but to be guarded when we're scrolling, when we're doom scrolling. But it is a difficult balance.
Yeah, it's interesting that there's a psychiatrist in the U.S. His name is Robert J. Lifton, who wrote a lot about the mind under severe circumstances. Like he wrote about the people who dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and about the Nazi doctors. And he coined this notion of psychic numbing, so that you numb yourself to the world because it's too overwhelming. So if you are the bomber dropping the bomb, you have to disregard some of your feelings, because otherwise it would be impossible to do this job. But he also, and others have said it too, that psychic numbing is actually also a place of survival, a coping mechanism. So it's again such a big paradox or contradiction that we need a certain degree of psychic numbing to hold out. So to say, well, be all the time totally open to the world, to all the news which is coming in from all corners. So you can also open your phone or computer, the news of Gaza or what's happening, Ukraine is happening in the world, and the ecological crisis is coming to you. This is an extraordinary circumstance. I think that human beings were never so tuned into as we are now. So I think in a profound sense, we need survival mechanisms. And also René Letzman, she's an ego therapist. She wrote Environment Melancholia book, and she says that apathy is actually a place where we can go to regain our ground, to slow down, to be able to find a way to move on. So that she talks about the gift of apathy, whereas usually we think don't be apathic, that closing yourself off to the world is about the last thing you should do. But maybe sometimes you need to be a bit apathic or to be in a place of apathy to see how you go forward. And there's this idea of Bayo Komolafe from Nigeria. He says, it's often quoted, the times are urgent, let's slow down. And it's, I think, a marvelous paradox, because if the times are urgent, everything is calling for action and not slowing down, to shift the gears into more speed, but that we should slow down. And I think part of this slowing down is also to allow yourself not to attend to the news all the time, or to be worried all the time. Not that attending is wrong, or not to say that worrying is wrong. We might have nightmares about what's happening, but that it is so, it's almost like a moral duty to take care of oneself.
That's true.
And sometimes it's a bit a cliche, but there's this idea that if you're in an airplane, it's maybe an odd example in this context, but if there's an unlikely event that the oxygen masks have to come down, please put the oxygen mask first upon yourself before you put it on others, like children or disabled people, older people. And this is often like a metaphor that you need to give yourself, in a real sense, oxygen before you're able to even start helping others. But I think that there's much truth in that if we don't take care of ourselves, that we're not much help for the rest of the society or the more than human world. So these things are related to each other. So it's not wasted time. I think that the same, it has to do in a way with it's maybe a larger context, but our Christian roots, like a Western European society in the Netherlands or Norway, Sweden. So much in our culture is the idea of sin, and that you have to make amends, or that you atone for it. Yeah, not amends. It's the word that if you go and you see the priests and you confess. You confess.
Okay, confess, and then you receive.
Yeah, you're allowed.
You receive forgiveness, so to speak.
Yeah, some sort of. At least you could go on, but our universe is so much that we. It is in a way appropriate to feel the guilt and so the pressure on you that you feel guilty by even being a human being, or for example, like if you are a parent of putting another life in the world, and then all the ecological pressures this may bring. And I think this is not helpful. I was very moved several years ago. We were working with people from the American Indian movement. This was in the early 1980s. We were very active as a group in non-violent action against nuclear energy. And so this group of Native Americans came to express their solidarity with the actions. They said, for us it doesn't matter if the uranium is mined on Black Mesa in the Arizona, or if it's mined among the Aborigines, often on indigenous people's grounds. We see it as one fight to save Mother Earth, and so against nuclear energy and against uranium mining. And then he invited us to come as a group in 1983 to visit different Indian nations, which we did for half a year. We toured around in the US. And then at one time there was a gathering of Indian activists, Native American activists of the American Indian movement. And Bill Wapapa was one of the leaders, and he came to report of his visit he had made to the Netherlands and to Belgium. And he started his presentation by telling about that he had met this young couple from Belgium for the second time. He had been there 2 years before, and then they were very worried about the world and only saw the destruction and the fear for the future. And when he came back 2 years later, just at his last visit, they had decided to have children, or to create a new life. And it was for him the most important news to tell about his visit to the nuclear power stations, these protests. That actually these two people who cared about the world also cared to have a baby. And so for others it might be like a big contradiction, why they should work on their worries and maybe even more intensely be activists. But for him to be connected with this larger web of life. And of course, he died several years ago, but also mindful of overpopulation. But there is indeed a place for human beings in the larger scheme. And I think the idea that you hear often, rather often these days, that if the environmental crisis goes on as it does, it would mean the end of the human species. It would be the planet will carry on. It might be good for nature if humans disappear because we are so destructive. But it seems to me that you hear this, or I at least heard it very seldom from indigenous peoples, this point of view.
Right.
So that tells me something, that maybe a certain group of human beings messed up completely. Mm-hmm. But that does not mean, for that sense, that we should exclude ourselves from what is there. So maybe the challenge is to find ways that are more resonating with the rest of creation, the rest of what is there.
Yeah, well, having myself a young daughter, I appreciate this story and very much resonate with it, because it means she's still very new in this world, but she's definitely the most valuable thing I've contributed so far to this place, I feel, by far. Do you have something to say to people who want to connect more to their senses, to the natural world, and who maybe are interested in exploring art as a way of being, or making that more part of their lives?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I would say to people who would like to integrate this dimension more is that, first of all, anybody talking about it, like me, for example, it's so different from what I can convey in words or try to articulate in sentences, from undergoing the experiences oneself. To me, this has often been so striking that I try to describe it to people and trying to encourage them to engage with these kind of activities. And they not quite get it, or they kind of get it, but then when they really do it, they are so different. The person has, something in the person has changed. And it tells you that words can only do so much.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would, some basic activity is maybe for anybody to find a place. It is good to find a place in nature, just to sit still, to sit in silence, to attend for a bit extended time to whatever might open up, or just what opens up in the mind's eye. And I think what's also a very good thing to do is just the basic thing of getting a small sketchbook and to make drawings of whatever you see, but then try to let the pencil itself lead you. What I mean with that is that you don't come with ideas that I should have the composition right, or the perspective, the lines moving towards a vanishing point on the horizon should all match. Try to put it aside. Just let the pencil or the brush dance on your paper, and do that more often, because if you do it more often, you can develop into a kind of habit and a way of relating to place. And it is so different if you make these drawings from making a photograph. Probably if you do this for an hour at a certain place, that place will stay with you for a long time in your memory. And by drawing for yourself non-judgmentally, so there's no monkey on your shoulder telling you you should do it like this or it's not
it's
right.
so hard.
Yeah, just the doodling of the drawing, and then allow it to be as it is, the spontaneous freedom, then the naivety, the supposed naivety, and then just see if you can expand on this, like maybe with artists or art teachers, that you go more into depth, that you find somebody who is willing or able or interested to put you on the wrong foot, so that you enter a new territory. And one thing I think is very key, and I didn't speak about that yet, and that is what I call the light in the eyes. Mm-hmm. The light in the eyes is that there is a sparkle of enthusiasm, of inspiration, that try to be with people where you pick this up. It doesn't necessarily have to be the teacher or the facilitator, but the people with whom you're working, that they are excited, that they are curious to see what will happen around the corner. That, for example, in Estonia, it happened that I was talking about wild painting, and everybody was so excited that they wanted to do this. And in a few hours, we had to leave back to the city, back to the art academy. They said, "Look out of the window, it's snowing. Why should we go painting?" But then they said, "Yeah, but we still want to do wild painting." Then I said, "Okay, let's do it." And I caught on there, and there's their light in their eyes, and they saw a light in my eyes, that I was actually interested, that they were so excited to do that. So it reinforces each other. And then if this happens, I think you can almost literally move mountains. Anything is possible, even if your easels collapse or if you get totally wet or cold. It doesn't matter, because you want to try it. So that kind of excitement is important, I think. And I think that the light in the eyes has something to do physically, that there's a small tear in your eye that reflects the light.
Wow.
The tear can be of joy, but also of the being overwhelmed. And to pick that up, to be attentive, to have your attention to when these moments, because they are rare usually, when these happen.
Yeah, and it's and not just in art making, I guess, just seeking that and following it when it presents itself.
Yeah. It's very good that you said it. So it doesn't by no means necessarily have to happen only in art. It's not like an exclusive domain. It can happen also through singing or whatever, in your dreams. And maybe also, because we talked about this vulnerability, that opening up to the profoundness of the not knowing and the unexpected and these other indirect qualities, it may be good to also seek company of people. Partly do it on yourself, maybe like making these drawings, these doodles in nature. Partly also work with a group that can hold you, that you make the journey together and inspire each other and learn from each other's experience, because it can be very rich to hear how the same experience has acted out for somebody very differently. So there's all these learning possibilities going on all the time, I think.
Thank you so much for taking time to have this chat.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been wonderful to sit here and just reflect on these issues, these themes. Reflecting on it and seeing the sky reflected in the lake. Yeah, there's this one expression of Paul Cézanne that is like maybe end on that. Yeah. His motto of Paul Cézanne, he says, when I paint, the landscape sinks itself through me. I become its consciousness. So that actually, as a painter, you...
Wait, say it again.
When I paint, says Paul Cézanne, the landscape sinks itself through me. I become its consciousness.
Mm.
The thinking through you. And many people, like Goethe said, every object well perceived opens up a new organ in perception inside of you.
A new organ of perception inside of you.
Yeah.
Mm.
So that something opens up in you by attending to the world. So by looking at the landscape, the landscape expresses itself through you.
Mm.
Of course, it doesn't really happen, but I think it's such a nice idea.
Yeah, and maybe it's that's also why I like having these conversations outside, because maybe we don't know in what ways, the place that we are is in speaking through us in some way. Yeah. Yeah.
I believe, indeed. And it's this deeper quality, is poetic or whatever we want to call it, but that there is a presence that maybe also allows us to open up for these dimensions that in a more closed walled environment it's more difficult to access.
Yeah. Jan shared lots of references in this conversation, and you can find links to all of that in the show notes. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider supporting it by sharing it with your friends, leaving a review in your listening app, or by becoming a paying supporter on Patreon or Substack. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.